Hello there and welcome to this week's business updates from the consulting room. Michael's taking a couple of days away, so I'm doing the business updates this week. Just picked out a few stories. Obviously, the news in the past 7 days has been dominated by what's happening in Ukraine, and we'll look at some of the knock-on effects from that, but really don't want to dwell too much on that, although it's obviously the major story of the week. But one thing that it is doing is having an effect on the price of oil globally. Although Russia only supplies about 8% of global oil supplies, the fact that nobody's touching Russian oil at the moment and the concern around the war is driving up the price of oil to a point at, it's not a record high, so it's reached $113 a barrel yesterday for Brent crude. And it was about that level back in 2014, I think. So it's not an absolute record high, but certainly for the last few years, if you see what we've got on the screen there, about 3 years ago, it was $75 a barrel during the pandemic lockdown. People weren't using so much oil, so it really did slide down to under $25 a barrel in April 2020 as people stopped using oil, stopped traveling, and that's crept back up and then shot back up in the last week to that sort of level. A couple of factors here. One is that OPEC cartel really that controls the amount of oil that's on the market, and therefore the price is releasing a bit more oil, but not really enough to compensate for the lack of Russian oil. And that's partly because sanctions on Iran may be lifted in the next couple of months, which may bring a flood of oil and bring prices back down. So it's volatile. We'll have to wait and see where it goes from here, but it certainly is already having an effect on petrol prices. They're at a record high in the UK now, up to, I think, an average of about £1.50 a litre, up above £1.70 in certain places. And that's the highest that it's ever been. I think probably from a small business point of view, more importantly, is the energy price cap rise that's going to take effect next month. And people will start to see this now. They'll get their estimates from their energy suppliers saying, this is what you paid last year, this is what you're likely to pay next year if you use the same amount of gas and electricity. And it's going to be a shock because prices are rocketing up, really. So this is from Ofgem. This is a sort of average of what prices are going to go up by. It does vary from place to place and depending on how you pay your electricity as well. But this is the general sort of guide, and standing charge for electricity is going up by £70 across the board. That's £70 on everybody's bill, really. And then electricity going up by 33% per kilowatt hour and gas by 75% per kilowatt hour. That means that most people's bills, well, the average bill, I think, is going up by about 40% in April. So that's a massive increase. If you're paying £1,500 last year, you'll be paying over £2,000 this year. So it's a big impact. It's a big impact on individuals, households, and potentially businesses, depending on how they pay for their electricity. One thing to remember is that energy is not capped for business, only for residential, but a lot of people are working from home. A lot of small businesses sort of run from home, and the amount of residential electricity and gas you use has a big effect on the costs for the business. So I think it's important to think about it, to have conversations about it. If you've got people in your business who are on national living wage or below the average wage, then this may have a really big impact on their household finances. It may mean that they can't buy things that they thought they were going to be able to for themselves, for their children. It may affect whether they can go on holiday. It can have a really big impact. And I think it's, rather than brush it under the carpet, and people may not be aware. They may have seen the headlines and not thought about it. And if they're on, rather than getting their bills through the post, they get them by email. It's very easy to miss an email about how much your bill has gone up, or not open the attachment and actually have a look at what it's saying. So some people may not even be aware of the impact that this is going to have. But I think it's a conversation worth having because it is going to affect people within the business. And if you look on BBC News today, then there's a story about some firms who are helping their staff to pay their energy bills. They've looked at this and thought, as you see the quote there from one boss, I want people to leave stresses at the door, but you can't do that when you have a massive bill to pay, you're not going to perform at your best. So if you want your staff performing at your best, it's not just about what they do when they're in work, it's about their whole situation. And certainly if you're asking them to work from home sometimes, then that's going to increase their own energy costs that they're bearing on behalf of the business. So it's something to think about for yourself. If you're paying for energy at work, or you've got that included in a rent deal, your landlord's going to have an increase in their gas and electricity bills. They're not going to be able to absorb that, certainly after the last couple of years they've had probably, so they'll be looking to pass that on at some stage. So this isn't going to go away, and it isn't going to be something that doesn't affect you, your business, and the people that work in your business. So certainly something to be aware of, something to think about, and think what the impact's going to be on your business and on individuals in it. And tied to that really is that whether we're, now that all the restrictions are lifted, whether we're going to be going fully back to work, whether you're hybrid working, 2 days one, 2 days the other, and 1 day floating, whatever it happens to be. This is the boss of Admiral, the insurer, who employ about, I think, 7,000 people in South Wales. She wants people to go back to the office, but she says in order to do that, in order for people to make the effort to come to the office, then they have to make the office environment attractive. People are got used to being at home and being comfortable, so if you want to bring them back in, you need to make sure they've got a nice place to come back into, so they've got bookable desks, breakout areas, redesigning whole floors in their headquarters in Cardiff. So what's the work environment that you're creating for people to come into? Because that is changing, potentially the whole way that we work is changing. So example from the story again, Rebecca Windsor, and she's a personal trainer, so she does go to the gym a lot, but the gym that she goes to for her own workouts has added in hot desks. So rather than work in one place and leisure in another place, those activities may become more mixed, more combined, more blended. And saw a report a couple of months ago suggesting that every street will have a co-working space of some kind, that people with large outbuildings, with large houses, may well dedicate somewhere, stick a couple of desks in, get good broadband, put a coffee machine in, and then you've got a hot desk in your street. So just the whole nature of how we work in different locations is going to be an interesting discovery really over the next 10 years or so. But being prepared for that and thinking about how things change is important for your business. And again, Sainsbury's supermarket reacting to the way that things are changing. So they're about to close 200 in-store cafes and 34 hot food counters. And really, this is because of the change in the way that people have eaten, again, largely over the last 2 years. We haven't been able to go out, so people have got more food delivered, they've got more takeaway food. And Sainsbury's trialled what they call a new food hall format, the restaurant hub in a store in Birmingham. And this was somewhere where they had gourmet burger kitchen, Ed's Diner, and something which I've never heard of called Slim Chicken, or Slim Chickens, available there. We call them like a franchise within supermarkets. So we've seen that in department stores over the last 20, 30 years, that a lot of the concessions, that's the word I was looking for, a lot of sort of concessions within the shop, maybe seeing that now coming into supermarkets. So they're going to trial another 30 food halls in 2022 and 30 Starbucks coffee shops. So they're moving away from the idea of having a cafe, just serving cafe food, and putting in, so their main offer is going to be Cafe Carluccio's and then a couple of other brands. They've got the kitchen there, they've got the space, but they're not just doing food on site, they will be doing home deliveries, they'll be doing takeaways as well. It's almost like the food court that you see in a shopping centre. And we've seen supermarkets move into other areas in all sorts of things that they didn't used to sell. And it's just another area that we'll see where they've got the real estate there and people are shopping more online, but they'll use the real estate in a different way. That's just quite an interesting move there, I think. Sainsbury's. John Lewis is going to end Never Knowingly Undersold, which has been their tag since 1925. So they would always match against physical retailers, not online retailers, but if there was a physical national chain that was selling something cheaper than them, they would price match. And it's not that price isn't going to be important, but they don't see themselves really competing against other physical retailers. in terms of price. They're competing against online, which they never promised to match anyway. So they're dropping that pledge. They're focusing more on the experience of being in the store. And that's what's going to bring people in there, rather than the fact that they can price match Currys on the business park or whatever. So again, changing businesses. The one constant in business is that it's going to change. And maybe another constant is the tube's on strike. So it's Thursday, the 3rd of March today, and for the second time this week, pretty much all tube services in London are closed. Excuse me. So there's 10,000 workers on strike. Most of the funding for the tube in London comes from fares, and obviously that's been massively hit in the last 2 years with people working from home, not being able to go in. It's interesting. So the money isn't there to do pay rises, to look after pensions, so they've got to look at different ways of funding. So the unions are taking people out on strike. It's difficult to solve that one, but they're probably not going to get back to the levels that they had pre-pandemic for quite a long time, if ever. If we get to this hybrid working, how many people are going to be going into London to work Monday to Friday? So tube's on strike. I wonder what the future of the tube is really. In terms of environmental policy, we ought to be encouraging people to use public transport, especially in big cities where it's easier to have those public transport networks. But at the same time, the world of work is changing, the world of travel is changing, and the tube and other public transport systems will need to adapt and will need to keep up with that. So anyway, that's the stories that we've picked out for you to have a think about this week. As always, love to have a chat with you, myself or Michael, when he gets back from his mini break. And have a good week, and we'll see you soon.